I think everybody's in. So hi everybody, my name's Jennifer Luarca. I am an academic coach at the Learning Center. And today I'm gonna cover some finals preparation tips. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. We have you all muted and no video, just so we can focus on the presentation. But at any time, if you have a question or you wanna participate in some way, you can use the chat function to let us know what your question or comment might be, and I will be monitoring that throughout. So don't wait till the end to ask your questions. Feel free to ask them as they come to your mind, and I will answer them as I get through each slide. Also, at a few different points in the presentation, we will be doing some polls just to engage you a little bit more in what we're talking about. So we'll let you know that there's a poll. If you can participate, that would be awesome. So we're gonna get started. Talking about finals prep today. First, I'm gonna cover some challenges that learning from home presents, some issues you may be facing and how to possibly resolve those. Then we're really gonna cover time management and the study cycle related to preparing for final exams. And then the last thing we'll touch on are some concrete tips in terms of studying for finals, okay? We can move to the next slide. There we go. So first I want to hit on the idea of resiliency. And this is really important for where we're at, not only academically, but personally, and just the wasn't working correctly. We want to first acknowledge what you're feeling in the moment. So if you can put a name to that emotion, that really helps you channel and identify what's going on. So something like, I feel frustrated with Zoom right now. That allows you to identify the emotion you're feeling. Then we want to start to reframe our feelings. So rather than focusing on the challenge that it poses, we want to focus on the opportunity it presents to overcome. So, all right, Zoom is giving me a lot of problems right now, but this is a chance for me to learn a workaround. So I'm going to go ahead and focus my energy there, right? So we move from this is a problem to now what is the solution? What can I do? And that leads into our next point is focus on what you can personally control. A lot of things, a lot of noise out there we have no control over. If you're watching the news a lot, it can feel really overwhelming because you're often thinking, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, what can I do about this? And what we need to do is focus on exactly that. What can I control in the moment? So in the example we're using, if Zoom isn't working, what can I do? I can Google a solution, or I can go on over to ATS and get some help, okay? And then one final point is just when you are participating online in study groups or study sessions in class, when possible, if there's discussion available, make sure that you're using your voice, but also that you're being inclusive and including others, even those quiet students that kind of like to sit in the back and hide when we are in in-person classes. We want to invite them in too. We want all voices heard, and we want that chance to share because everybody's going to learn better that way. All right, and so we also want to kind of grasp on or hold on to this idea of a new normal. So when we're studying now, things are different. The obvious change is that we're at home and we're on screens a lot more than we have been before. So we want to accept those changes and adapt to them as best as possible. Again, working on that resilience. So things that we know will help as you're learning in this online platform is having a study schedule, creating a study schedule for your week, but also being flexible in adapting week to week. So on a weekly basis, you want a schedule that will allow you time to give to each class, but on the weekends, you want to reflect on that. Was that helpful? What changes need to take place? And how am I going to adjust for the following week? We are thinking week to week right now because there are so many changes happening each day and things are really fluid. So while we want to have a plan for study, we want to be flexible in that plan as much as possible. Also, communication is key. I know a lot of students are not comfortable talking with professors, but this is really critical to your success at this point. So any question you have, any concern, any challenge, you want to be reaching out and communicating that to the professor. First, they're the ones that are teaching, so they can help you the best. But also, many instructors have not taught online and may not know that their method is not translating to students well. So that feedback loop of telling them, hey, this seems weird, or this isn't working, right? This link doesn't work, something like that, can really help them adapt as well. We're all helping each other right now, and the main way we're doing that is through communication. We also want to be practicing often. So I was just working with a few students this week who said, when I asked how do you study, they say they study about a week before the test. That approach isn't going to work in this new platform. We really need to be studying every week on a regular basis leading up to exams. And specifically right now, we have about 2 weeks till exams, so we should be building in our study sessions weekly heading towards finals. Okay, and then just really trying to focus on the positivity and the opportunity aspects that are presented right now. We're really rounding out our learning skills in this new space of online learning, and it can be a positive thing. So we want to focus on those positives. And lastly, we want to think in terms of outlets for stress or taking breaks. Those should not be digital breaks. So in the past, when we were learning in classrooms, we would, take a break and hop on our phone. Some of us still might be doing that, but that is so much time on a screen for your eyes. So you're going to get fatigued a lot faster, and you're going to shrink your focus time. So what we want to do is make sure that your breaks now are physical, are not digital whenever possible. So find ways that you can take a break without looking at a screen. That's going to be really important as we move towards finals. All right, and so the next slide, before I cover the information here, we're going to take our first poll. So we will be putting up a question, and so just answer that, and then we will share the results before we start to talk about this content. There you go. So the question is, are your final exam dates and times in your calendar? Okay, looks like that's about everybody. So good thing you guys are here today. Many of you do not have your dates and times in your calendar. So if you get anything from this workshop, please put your final exam dates and times in your calendar this weekend. Whether that's your Outlook, your phone calendar, set a reminder, something. We want to be aware at this point. Like I said, we have about 2 weeks till finals. We want to know exactly when those finals are coming. That's going to help us a lot in terms of managing our stress and anxiety. Also in terms of just beginning to prepare for these exams. So we can take that poll down, and I'll cover the information on this slide. Let's see. All right, so as I said, one really, really important aspect of doing well on finals is knowing the timeline. So please, 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 tomorrow or this weekend, get out a calendar template of some sort. You may be using your phone, that's fine, Outlook. You may even just want to print a paper calendar at this point, but we want to get in all of our final exam dates and times. Now, things might be a little different. Some people may have open-ended finals where they'll be assigned a final on one day and they have to turn it in by a certain day. We still want to know those dates because we don't want to miss a window of submission, okay? So get your dates and times in on your calendar. Then, moving backwards from those dates and times, we want to start to plan when we're going to study. Now, as I said earlier, we don't want to wait till the week before to start to study for finals. That's a little too late because that's so many tests we have to, or so much content we have to learn in such a short amount of time. So what we want to do is for next week and the week after, we want to identify at the very, very least 2 times per week we're going to study for each of our classes moving in towards finals. So Those should be 2 times a week that you study only for final exams, not times that you do homework or assignments or things like that. Those are other times. We want 2 times a week just to study for your final exams. Again, we have 2 weeks left. So that should be, you know, that's going to be about, if you're only doing twice a week for finals, that will be 4 study sessions. It'd be better if you could do more, but at the very least, we want that. Okay. And then starting this weekend and next week, early part of next week, we want to start to prepare your study tools for your finals. So start to look at, what finals do I have? What content do I need to cover? And what study tools am I going to use? Okay. And the last tip in regards to time management is, when we're setting up study times, we also want to set up study team meetings. I'm calling study groups study teams right now, because our groups aren't just focused on learning the material, but we're really helping each other meet deadlines and remind each other of things that are due, and helping each other learn in new ways. So we want to focus on our peers in our classes as team members, and we're all working towards the same goal of doing well in class. So set up a few times to check in with your team over the next couple of weeks and make sure you guys are progressing and helping one another towards that end goal of final exams. Okay. And so when we're thinking about studying for your exams, we want to think in terms of a flow. So if any of you practice yoga, we have a lot of flows. The breath carries us to each movement, right? There are flows in other aspects of life as well. But we want to think of that as we're studying here. And we want to know that there's different stages of our learning process, and those should stretch throughout the week. So we want to first always start your week with a review of content, a review of your lecture notes, and a review of any course materials. So your first kind of moment in this study flow is checking in with your course notes, checking in with PowerPoints, listening to a lecture, whatever it might be, just to get clarification and to hear this information again. Then step 2 of that flow is starting to engage with that material. So maybe you learned about photosynthesis. So step 1 would be to hear about it, maybe understand that it's a 2-part process, whatever it might be. And then step 2 is maybe diagramming that process out, or writing out in your own words what those terms mean and how they relate to one another. Okay. And then section 3 of the study flow is really, at another point during the week, revisit that material and see if you can pull it back from your memory on your own. So we're going from step 1 being something passive where you're just kind of looking and reading, to step 2 where we're becoming a little more active with the material, practicing with help. And then number 3 is really doing some independent testing of your knowledge to see if you've retained information. Okay. Now this flow can stretch throughout one study session. It can stretch throughout a week. It's really your preference, what works best for you. But we want to, within this flow, always be thinking about what is your personal focus time, and we want to work with that as much as possible. So if you know you can only stay focused for 30 minutes, then your sessions are going to be 30-minute long with a break and then revisiting. Okay. Yeah, that's about it for that slide. Now we're here on our next poll. Oh, actually, we'll do the poll at the end of this slide. So this slide is really about understanding the big picture. So when we learn information, our brain stores it in what are called neurons, neural connections. Those connections are made in our brain, and we really have a nice big web of information in our brain. When we learn something new, it connects to something we already know or understand about that content. So what we want to do as we're practicing is mimic that idea of connecting information. And when we do that, we want to think in terms of a hierarchy. What is the most kind of main idea, the biggest idea in regards to these concepts, and how do the other ideas relate to that? So you'll see here in these diagrams, there's a big picture, or there's a initial key concept, and then we break that down into other smaller concepts. The more you can do this with what you're learning about, the better you understand the connections, and the easier it will be to answer questions if they incorporate multiple concepts. The idea here is that we're getting a framework that we then situate our details into. And the analogy I always use with this is when we do a puzzle. We usually will do the outside of the puzzle first, creating a frame so the small details can situate or be put into the puzzle a lot faster. That's the same way we learn. A lot of students take the approach of learning all the details, then trying to figure out the big picture. But just like with a puzzle, if we did the little pieces first, it takes longer and it's harder to do. But if we take a second and we look at what the big picture is, then those small pieces situate a lot faster and more efficiently. So we want to learn the same way. We want to back up, look at the big picture, then focus on the detail. And that leads us to our next poll question. So our next poll is, where can you find the big picture for concepts you are learning? The table of contents in your textbook, course syllabus, lecture outlines, or all of the above? What could you reference to try to get an idea of how all this information connects? Okay, I think we can stop the poll. So here's our shared results. Looks like most of you thought all of the above, and you're exactly right. Nobody chose, I guess, the textbook by itself, but all of these aspects, the textbook, the table of contents is an excellent source of connection. It's really important to look there, even if you're not reading all of the text. Check out the table of contents because it will show you what the big ideas are versus the smaller details, and it'll show you how things connect. I like students using the table of contents as a final check for understanding. So once you feel like you know everything, check out the table of contents and see if you can talk through the title of the chapter down to the very end. If you can talk through those connections, you know the content pretty well, okay? Course syllabus, definitely, because you'll see how the instructor shared it. And then lecture outlines, of course, it's going to show you what information is important and how those things are connected. So use all of those resources. We really want to get just a good idea of how things are connected, how they're organized, because that helps our memory system ultimately. Okay. And the next slide, please. All right. So now, once you've understood the information and the connections, you want to think about applying your knowledge in the context of the exam. So a lot of students will focus on, if we're looking at the right hand of this slide, the two bottom pieces of information. So they'll focus on comprehension or knowledge-based information. They will learn the definition. They will be able to identify it or pick it out of a group of concepts, right? And that's how we study. We define and memorize. But then on the exam, we get that third, that application question. It's not asking you a definition. It's not asking you to pick out what the concept is. It's now asking you to make that concept live in real life, whether it's giving you a real life example or it's asking you to explain a real life example. And if you haven't practiced application when you're studying, that can be very, very challenging on the exam. So we want to make sure when you're studying, you can move through all these different levels of knowledge or understanding, that you can explain the concept in your own words, that you can identify it or classify it or connect it with other concepts, and that you can show us how this concept lives in the real world, right? Now, on the right hand of this slide, you'll see that there's an explanation of what that level of learning is. So application is applying knowledge to actual situations. And then you'll see verbs there. So I want you to think about using these verbs as you study. If you can do these verbs, if you can do these things as you study with the concepts you're learning, then you understand it well at those different levels. So those are a great way to check for understanding or just practice when we're at that third stage of our study cycle, which is testing our knowledge. If you can arrange the concepts with all the other concepts you've learned and then describe each concept and then maybe demonstrate your knowledge through an example, then you've got a really good understanding of that concept and you can move on, okay? But this is just really hitting at the idea of being able to move through these levels of knowledge and learning fluidly so that you can be adaptable on the exam, or you can adapt to the questions that come at you on the exam. Okay. All right. And then going along with those levels of learning, we want to think through all of them as we practice, just as I said. So this is a worksheet that is on the Learning Center's webpage under academic coaching and resources. And then the section called study strategies, there's a worksheet with these same questions or directions on it. You can feel free to grab that and practice. But as we're learning, we want to be able to write about the concept in book terms, so using technical terminology. Then we want to be able to explain it in our own words, right? Then we want to have an example, real or made up, of what this concept looks like in the real life. Then if you can create a diagram or illustrate the concept visually, that's a good way to test your understanding as well. Demonstrate a connection between the concept you're learning and something you've previously learned. That's really important because on finals, instructors are having to assess your knowledge on so much information that when possible, they will combine terms in one question. So understanding not just how something is by itself, but how it interacts with other concepts is going to be critical to you succeeding on your final exam. And then finally here is predicting exam questions. If you can predict exam questions and put yourself in the place of the instructor, then that shows a different level of learning or understanding of the concepts. So that's just a really nice final activity to do once you feel confident with the material. All right, and then this idea of connections keeps coming up, and that's intentional. Those connections are critical to your retention or your memory of something that you're learning. So we always want to, again, start with a quick review. What happened last time in class? What do I already know about this concept before reading or learning about it, right? And then make that connection pretty explicit for yourself. Okay, this connects in this way. And then that act of activating prior knowledge or reviewing past lectures is really, really important in terms of getting information into your long-term memory center. So repetition is important. That's why we need to be seeing this content repeatedly as we move towards final exams. So another reason why we want at least 2 study sessions per course each week, more if possible, okay? And then some study tools that you can use, concept maps, which we saw a little bit earlier. That's just visually organizing information in new ways. Using flashcards, if that's something that works for you, then please continue to do that. I would just suggest limiting your flashcard to 5 words or less. Again, we don't want to look at it and say, oh, yep, that's it, and put it away, because that's not a test of our understanding. What we want to do is be able to look at the flashcard, get a couple hints, but pull back the information on our own as much as possible, okay? Mnemonics are great to remember things. And mnemonics are words that stand for other words or processes or concepts. So you'll see here on the right-hand side the word relax, but each letter stands for a different part of the testing experience. So just nice reminders. Mnemonics work because it takes something we're familiar with and it connects it to something we're not so familiar with in a new way. So again, that connection, right? And then study in groups or teams and test each other. So when you're studying or when you're working with a tutor, I want you to really, it's really, really important to add in at the end. A lot of times you will explain something to a peer or they will explain it back to you, and then people will say, do you understand? And the other person will say, yeah, I got it. And then that's that. What I want you to do is always say, yes, let me explain it back to you. Because that puts you in the position of having to recall the information, and it tests your knowledge. And sometimes things are familiar to us, but when we start to put them into words, it's hard. It's good to know that before you take the test, because you could fine tune that information and revisit what needs to so you feel more confident with the content. Okay. And spacing that workout. We've mentioned this a few times too. But it's important to know that cramming increases anxiety. So the longer you wait to get started, when it comes to finals, you can expect your stress levels to rise. Again, we know we have finals coming in 2 weeks. You guys are going to put those into your calendar this weekend or today even maybe. And at that point, you'll be very certain when those tests are coming, and we can get started early, because the earlier you start and the more often you see the material, the less likely you are to have a lot of stress and anxiety when you're taking that exam, okay? Again, a reminder to work with your natural focus time. Check in with yourself. Right now, things are different. Some of you that may have been morning people might not be anymore, vice versa. So check in. When are you working best throughout your day? How can you maximize that? What area of your house or apartment or wherever you're at, what area is best for you to study? And just, again, be reminded, or if I can remind you, that these screens have the blue light is incredible. Our exposure to it right now has increased significantly. So be aware of that. That increases eye fatigue, and which then affects your focus time. So the more you can have natural lighting in your study spaces, the better it is for you in the long run, and the more you're going to be able to focus, okay? And then start early, study often. So if you can get started studying this week, that is awesome. Please do that. And the less you cover in one study session, the better for your memory system. So focus on a couple of key items, practice those. Then the next time, start with a review of those and then add on the new stuff. And we'll continue on that pattern, and that will really help reinforce material in your memory system. Okay, and we're almost done here. The next slide, we want to do a poll real quick here, our last poll. So if you know what your learning style is, please chime in. All right, we can go ahead and that. It looks like we have a lot of visuals, which is great because we're on the screen so much. So hopefully that you're able to use that and work with that. We have a couple that don't know. So for those of you who don't know what your learning style is, you can take that assessment at the Learning Center's webpage under academic coaching and resources. There's a button you can push that will help you do your learning style. But our primary learning styles are auditory, visual, or kinesthetic. And it's not important, I'd say, to think of learning styles in the way that, oh, I'm auditory, I'm only going to listen to things. We don't want to take that approach, but we do want to be aware that there are different ways to get information into your memory system, and you want to try to use as many of those as possible. So while you may know you're auditory, and it's good to be aware of that because that's what you'll gravitate towards. You'll want to talk about it. You'll want to explain it to others, the concepts. But then you also want to know that's my strength, but I want to also try to draw a diagram, and I need to be able to explain this or create something with it. So activating that visual and kinesthetic side as well. The more styles you incorporate, the better, more well-rounded learner you are. So it's really important to try to get as creative as possible as you're studying and connect with the material through a lot of different mechanisms. Again, drawing it out or making a diagram or color coding things, explaining things out loud, and then maybe teaching it or creating a new way of looking at the information. All of those things will help you store your information and also pull it out in new different ways and practice, okay? And this next slide will really illustrate that nicely. So you'll see up at the top of that little pyramid on the right-hand side, 5% of lecture, 10% of reading, 20% of audio visual. This is really showing how much information we'll retain when we're studying. And as you get down towards the bottom of that pyramid, you'll see 90% of what we teach to others, we retain. So our goal for you is that you get into a really active state of mind when you're studying, and you get to a point with the material that you can explain it to somebody else, okay? Sitting with it quietly is a great start, but it should not be where you finish. You wanna move forward to a point where you can at least talk about and draw this information out in new ways, okay? So yeah, I think that's about it. And another way to kind of practice the information, again, is predicting exam questions. So how would the instructor test me on these 3 items? How would they make it 1 question with these 3 items or 3 different questions with these items? Okay. And so just to wrap it up, start studying now, figure out your exam schedule now, please. Always think about applying your knowledge. So starting at a place where your understanding is good, and it's very important, but we want to inch towards that ability to use this information in new ways, which is really what our final exams are going to be about, is testing your understanding and application of concepts, okay? In order to retain information, it's going to be easier for you if you provide a structure of how this information relates to each other. So if you can create a framework or that puzzle frame and then put the pieces in, you're going to retain it better and have an easier time recalling the information. Practice as often as possible, every other day if you can, but at the very least, 2 good final study sessions a week from here till finals. And then just try to focus on the positives. If you hit a point in your study where you're like, man, this content is really hard, I don't understand this concept at all, our first thing we should do is shoot off a question, whether that's to our study team or our professor, and then we move on. We don't sit there and wait, and we don't ruminate on the fact that we don't know this. We need to move on to a concept that we feel comfortable with, and we need to continue practicing until we hear back from our resources. Okay, so try to keep that forward momentum, try to keep optimistic and positive, and utilize the resources you have. There's tutoring out there, there's your professors, I'm available, there's help out there, but you need to really quickly reach out to that help because it might take a day or 2 for people to get back to you. Okay, and then work in short focus sessions as much as possible. Know your study time or your focus time and work with that as best as you can, okay? And that's about it for me. If you want more support or you want to talk through how to study for a specific class, or I've been working with a lot of students lately who are doing some assignments and they're just struggling, you can make appointments with me via single sign-on in SSC Advising and Tutoring. You select Get Help and then Academic Coaching, and my name's Jennifer Luarca. And then you can choose online appointment. If that's too much for you or you're not sure how to do that, you can always email me. My name is right there, Jennifer Luarca. So my school email is jennifer.luarca@csulb.edu, and I'll help you set that up. Also, there are a lot of study resources and finals resources on the Academic Coaching resource page. So if you just Google that or Google Learning Center and then go to Academic Coaching, it's all there. And thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Sonia now.